Good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome all of you to the second evening of the inaugural Ambedkar Lectures at Barnard and Columbia. We had a huge crowd last evening as well, and it's wonderful to be able to commemorate this event across these 2 days. This is a historic event that connects this institution with one of the great figures in the history of modern democratic thought, recognized as the principal architect of India's constitution, a document whose words imagine a social revolution of immense magnitude. Ambedkar is even more potent today, 70 years after his death, than he was in his lifetime. From Dalit struggles to reclaim the public sphere and modes of self-presencing, to his place in the canon of Indian political thought as a thinker of radical equality, Ambedkar is everywhere. I'm especially glad, therefore, that we can bring Ambedkar home to the institution that formed him intellectually and nourished him spiritually. I'm Anupama Rao. I teach in the history department at MISAS, and I'm the acting director of the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society. So I'm proud that ICLS is hosting these annual lectures with enthusiastic multi-year support from Provost Linda Bell at Barnard, the Office of the EVP at Columbia, David Madigan and Maya Tolstoy, and Columbia's Dean of Humanities, Sarah Cole. We're also grateful for generous support from numerous units across campus, the Center for Contemporary Critical Thought, the Institute for Research in African American Studies, MISAS, the Society of Fellows and the Heyman Center, and the South Asia Institute. Sarah Monks, the Assistant Director of ICLS, and Josue Chavez, who many of you know from his emails, have worked tirelessly on every aspect of this event. I also want to remember Raju Kamble, as I did yesterday, and the Ambedkar International Mission for the extraordinary work that they've been doing since 1994 in connecting Ambedkarites worldwide. My immense thanks to each of them. I also want to remind you that we have a Wikipedia-thon for rewriting Dalit history tomorrow, organized with Equality Labs, and this will be held at Butler Library in studio at Butler. So why Ambedkar now? Yesterday was devoted to Ambedkar as the audacious thinker of the universal, who illuminates the pathways through which subaltern subjects enter the regime of rights and recognition. I want to stage our collective conversation today by asking, what would the origins of Indian democracy look like if, contrary to the conventions of nationalist historiography, we think of the 20th century history of the continent and the 21st century history of the subcontinent now as a history of the minority subject? Bringing Dalit histories and studies of partition together in a single analytic field might be one way to illuminate the uncertain impact of modern conceptions of history, identity, and territory as empires gave way to nation states and decolonization restructured key concepts of majority and minority. As a consequence of the colonial identity of Hindus and Muslims as majority and minority communities and the complex status of Dalits in this equation, we continue to see the reverberations, I should say, of those structurings well into the present today. Muslim communities are increasingly ghettoized, and they're experiencing a near total exclusion from political power. Meanwhile, Dalits are vulnerable and excessively visible to the state in contemporary India. Insurgent mobilization and persistent demands for affirmative action notwithstanding, social exclusion and violence are key mechanisms by which their visibility is manifest and caste privilege reproduced. The term lynching, which is borrowed from the context of white supremacist violence against African Americans to describe recent assaults on Dalits and Muslims suspected of either eating beef or engaging in the beef trade, shows how contemporary Hindutva politics secures its power by otherizing both Dalits and Muslims, and the complex and contradictory forms of solidarity and affinity that may be possible amongst them. If excision from the body politic defines Muslims' relationship to the Indian state, Dalits are marked by forms of negative sociality, that is, practices of prejudice, humiliation, and corporal violence, which secure the relationship between Dalits and caste Hindus. I want to take you now to questions of symbolic politics and what we might think of as mobilizations of counter-violence and counter-organizing by speaking a little bit about the 1970s and taking you to the place where I work, which is Maharashtra and to Bombay in particular, and the emergence of the Dalit Panthers, which I think offers one way to think about what we're going to be hearing today from both Sudipta Mandal and from Gayatri. In June of 1972, in Bombay, the newspapers Navakal and Prajasatak spoke about the emergence of a new group called the Dalit Panthers, who came onto the scene by expressing antagonism to the Republican Party of India, the established party of Ambedkar after his death in 1956. They offered vitriolic criticism of the corruption of Dalit political leaders and devastating criticism of state violence. Their claims to self-representation and their anti-establishmentarianism also brought them into direct conflict with the Shiv Sena, which was emerging at the time. The Panthers' posture of taking on state government and ossified RPI leadership was persuasive if measured by the spread of their chawnis. By using a term that designated the march of the Dalit Mahar military unit, the Panthers signaled a military urban presence. And of course, they were in conversation with the history of the Panthers, the Panthers here in the United States. Within a year, the Dalit Panthers had established 32 Bombay chawnis and had branches all over Maharashtra and Western India. These chawnis were autonomous, often started on impulse, loosely funded at public meetings and through journalism. Handbills or progressive newspapers, such as Navashakti or Navakal, published notices of quickly organized meetings and morchas or processions. Decentralized structure was the strength of the Panthers, but perhaps also their undoing. The Panthers had no single leader and no long-term strategy, perhaps. In fact, branches and leaders sometimes came into conflict with each other, but nonetheless, public meetings served as ecstatic commemorations and public affirmations of a despised and denigrated identity, now resignified as political potential and deeply militant. So what's clear is that the Panthers sought a new grammar of political charisma. Symbolic politics became a crucial axis of political subject formation, partly due to the political vulnerability of the Dalit communities. It was also related to the crisis of leadership that followed Ambedkar's demise. And finally, it was reflected in an ongoing and inherent tension at the very heart of Dalit identity. Was Dalit an identity, or did it signal a political potentiality that exceeded these communities that were governmentally designated as ex-untouchable? At this time, both the RPI and the Dalit Panthers laid claim to Ambedkar and made him a key symbolic site for reworking the Dalit past, the Dalit self, and the Dalit present. Ambedkar's erratic name and a consistent return to Ambedkarite symbolism, whether through installations of Ambedkar statues in rural areas, the proliferation of the Neela Jhanda, the blue flag, recognizably the Ambedkarite blue flag, or the distinctive greeting, Jai Bhim, blessed Dalit political activism of all stripes, even when such activism reflected significant emendation of Ambedkar's own project. So Ambedkar was indeed a floating signifier, a sign attached to a diverse range of social practices and political demands that brought them all into a unified domain of action and visibility. The name, indeed, was important currency circulating through diverse arenas and accruing great signifying power, as were the new iconic representations of Ambedkar that were dotting the public sphere. So I want to sort of call up this moment as a way to recollect that time, but to also signal some continuities with this moment, which is, I think, a new moment of emerging Dalit formations in youth politics. Right? And it's also important to mark the fact that there is no easy distinction when one speaks about Dalit politics between apparently symbolic and real politics. The very claim to self-presence, to occupy public space, to be present in public, is itself a deeply political demand, and it's contested again and again and again. The iconic text that announced Dalit writing at this time, much as the Panthers announced themselves, is surely Namdev Dhasal's Golpita, which was written in 1972. As is well known, the critic and playwright Vijay Tendulkar, an upper caste but radical progressive playwright, noted that he was unable to understand Dhasal's Marathi because he lacked access to the life of everyday violence and sudden intimacies that Dhasal described. He wrote, "This is a world where the night is reversed into the day, where stomachs are empty or half empty, of desperation against death, of the next day's anxieties of bodies left over after being consumed by shame and sensibility, of insufferably flowing sewages, of diseased young bodies lying by the gutters, braving the cold by folding up their knees to their bellies, of the jobless, of beggars, of pickpockets, of holy mendicants, of neighborhood tough guys and pimps." Dalit life then, especially in Bombay, was street life, defined by a lack of privacy and proximity to all manner of detritus. In Dasar's writings, Dalit existence, as it is with Prakash Ambedkar's famous poem, Under the Other Bridge, which is sort of looping around on the screen. Oh, no, Prakash Zadav, I'm sorry. Under the Other Bridge, was very much about evoking a proximity between Dalit existence and life in the city. Bombay indeed was the protagonist of much of Dalit Sahitya at the time, but it was a Bombay marked by informal livelihoods and lumpen lives. Dasar himself was working as a taxi driver when he wrote Golpita, and his family had migrated to Dhortsal in Arab Gully near Golpita, the black hole, as he called it, of Bombay's traditional red light district. Dasar embraced an aesthetic politics himself. His investment in violent visibility was predicated on the symbolic efficacy of violent language, not to mention the Panther's commitment to the instrumental efficacy of street fighting. So this is indeed a kind of violent presencing in the public sphere and an assault, as it were, on the manners of respectable language. And it's really a claim to remaking language and therefore to remaking the self. Dalit precarity and informality, rather than being viewed as an aberration, increasingly enabled Dalits to assert their right to the city because they existed as a form of political life. That they existed on a continuum with the city streets, scarred by human violence and excised from the sanctioned circuits of production and reproduction, enabled a set of associations between Dalit life and urban materiality. And what this did was to showcase the unique mutuality between Dalit Sahitya and the Bombay modern, as itself a project of political aesthetics. So these practices of worlding, I want to suggest, are deeply significant for us when we think about Ambedkar now. This is Ambedkar after Ambedkar, as it were, much as we spoke about Ambedkar in his time as someone whose deep globality actually allowed us to establish new connections and see new kinds of conversations that were happening in a global sphere. So I'm going to stop here and use this as an occasion this evening to welcome you all, to give you, and this is a way to give you some hint of what is to come with the presentations by Sudipta Mondal and Gayatri Bahadur. But I want to start now by introducing our speakers for the evening. And I'm going to start with Linda Bell, who's going to offer welcoming remarks. And then I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers, Sudipta and Gayatri, as well as Ira Katz-Nelson, who will be offering closing remarks for the evening. Linda Bell is Professor and Dean of the Faculty at Barnard College, where she's also Claire Tao Professor of Economics. Previous to joining Barnard, Professor Bell was a provost and John Herford Professor of Economics at Haverford. She's also a research fellow at the Institute for the Study of Labor in Bonn, Germany, and a senior consultant for the Labor Practice Group of the National Economic Research Associates. Previously, Provost Bell was a senior economist in the research department of the Federal Reserve in New York, and project faculty on a Danish Research Council-funded initiative at the Aarhus Business School in Denmark. Sudipta Mondal, who has traveled from Hyderabad and Bangalore to be with us today, is an investigative journalist who reports mostly from South India on caste, communalism, and corruption. He's writing a book on the death of the Dalit research scholar Rohit Vemula and the 25-year history of the organization to which he belonged, the Ambedkar Students Association. He is also going to be reading to us this evening from a semi-autobiographical piece of writing about his own, I suppose, self-formation and its relationship to Bangalore's urbanity. Gayatri Bahadur is a Guyanese-American writer. She's the author of Coolie Woman, The Odyssey of Indenture, which is a personal history of indenture shortlisted in 2014 for the Orwell Prize. the British Literary Prize for artful political writing. Her debut fiction, the short story The Stained Veil, appears in the feminist press anthology Go Home. Her essays, criticism, and reporting have appeared in the New York Times Book Review, The Nation, Dissent, Lapham's Quarterly, VQR, the Boston Review, the LARB, Foreign Policy, and elsewhere. And Ira Katznelson, who will be offering concluding remarks this evening, is an Americanist whose work has straddled comparative politics and political theory, as well as political and social history. He was the president of the Social Science Research Council until very recently, and his most recent books are Fear Itself, The New Deal and the Origins of Our Time, Liberal Beginnings, Making a Republic for the Moderns, and When Affirmative Action Was White, An Untold History of Racial Inequality in 20th Century America. So I'm going to ask Linda to come up and offer some welcoming remarks, and then we'll move right into Sudipto's comments and reading, and then Gayatra's responses. So please join me in welcoming all of them this evening, and we're really honored to have you.
Thank you, Anu. It's really a pleasure to be here today and welcoming you to tonight's event. It's really a great privilege of this university, Columbia University, to be linked to Ambedkar's legacy and to host this lecture series in his honor. It takes a village at Columbia University to get things done. So there are a lot of people to thank for this event, many of whom I am probably unaware of. But I do want to shout out our colleagues at Arts and Sciences, David Madigan, and the Hyman Center and the Heyman Center and the ICLS. And from my perspective, perhaps most importantly, my colleague at Barnard, Professor Anu Rao. Anu, for those of you who know her, has a legacy which is unyielding. It's her energy, vision, thirst for information, sense of pursuit for human rights and justice is, on Barnard's campus, certainly legendary. I would say that she's unstoppable and unflappable, and most of the time, we're very grateful for that. More than that, this lecture series represents, I think, what we do best in academia, which is the collaboration of institutions and individuals. And in this case, it's a pleasure to collaborate with our colleagues at Columbia, as we do all the time and in so many varied ways. We are, in so many respects, one institution. Of course, the accomplishments of this great man, Ambedkar, are well known to almost all of you in this gathering. His denunciation of established order and his denunciation of caste were intentioned and persistent reflections of a powerful and, I would add, an educated man, a man with vision. After earning a PhD in economics from Columbia in 1916, Ambedkar went on to study political science at LSE, transforming himself into a leading voice in the movement for Indian democracy and the right of Dalit women and laborers. Thoughtful, trained, and very well educated, he went on to become a law minister in the Indian government and took a major role in writing of the Indian Constitution and all of the associated societal changes that came thereafter. I would argue that today is a perfect time to reflect on his accomplishment. We live certainly in extremely challenging times, times where the purity of fact is way too often discarded and where untruths contravene against human rights, against justice, and against the betterment of peoples and societies. Certainly in the US here, we live in a time of great and truly unparalleled economic inequality and of growing and disturbingly so isolationism. All of which suggests that our institutions, which have forever been transformative places, have an even greater duty to protect pure scholarship, to protect free speech, and to protect the free exchange of ideas. As provost at Barnard, it's really my distinct pleasure to be here. At Barnard, we like to say that we embody in what we do, in what we teach, in what we aspire to become. We embody the kind of growth and change that is so necessary for our world. In partnership with Columbia University, we have the opportunity to educate leaders and to transform societies, and we take this mission extremely seriously. The life of Ambedkar should remind us that our institutions matter, that we have the opportunity to educate, inspire, and to transform individuals. It should remind us that gatherings like this matter, that each of us has an obligation to insist in our own way on fact, to push for change and to seek a better world. And we look to this fine man's contributions and his countless refusals to be silent in the face of oppression. And together we seek to emulate his leadership of ideas and the steadfastness of his true moral courage. We all have a lot to learn as institutions, surely, and we can take inspiration from him. So unfortunately, I have many duties, among which are to be available to parents for Parents Weekend. So unfortunately, I'll be unable to attend the event and the lecture this evening, and I apologize for that. I give you my word, I will look at it on videotape. Okay? I wish you all a wonderful evening, and thanks, Anu, for inviting me to make some remarks. Thank you.
Jai Bhim. That's an indication of the power of the International Ambedkarite movement. I've been hearing a couple of interesting terms since I've come here at this conference. Universal Ambedkar, Ambedkar for the world as a global thinker, and also this conference. It's historic, right? And I was about to say historic for Ambedkar because finally he's here. But actually now, after I have to reconsider that and say, historic for Columbia, not bad for you. I want to also shout out to the people who made this possible. It is definitely a great moment for the Ambedkarite movement. I'll tell you a tiny story about how I landed here in the middle of the night, the first night I arrived here, and the hotel turned me away saying they don't have me registered. And nothing, I didn't feel the least bit bothered. I was a little sleepy. I called up Suraj Engde, who was one who most of you know about. And I said, Suraj, so yeah, I'm stuck outside here, is there a place? Yeah, so Biju's house is there, just go there. It happened so easily, so seamlessly, just that, a Dalit man landing in New York, calling another Dalit man, saying, I don't have a place to stay. And he's like, yeah, you're in Harlem? Or which? Oh yeah, that place is closed, don't go to the other place. Right? That's how many places we have today. And that's, I suppose, an indication of the influence this man had on our lives, our society, our emancipation. Right, so those are the thoughts I want to start with, but I'm not going to say many things off the cuff today. I'm just going to read an excerpt from the proposal that I wrote for this book. The actual excerpt from the actual book is something I'm not yet confident of sharing with all of you. This is a room full of scholars. I'll keep that for later, but here we go. I've been reporting on caste and Dalit atrocities for a decade. Never before had I seen so many people turning up to demand justice for a dead Dalit. It was cringeworthy yet poignant when some commentators described Rohit Vemula's death as the Nirbhaya moment of the Dalit movement. The comparison seemed to flatten and diminish both the tragedies. When I reached the Hyderabad Central University, HCU, a week after Rohit Vemula's death in January, I was surprised also by the type of people who were camping near the tent in which he spent his last days. They were English-speaking, urbane, trendily dressed, upper caste and upper class. Students, teachers, lawyers, writers, poets, world-renowned academics, Marxists, Maoists, liberals, feminists, environmentalists even. Rohit and 4 of his comrades from the Ambedkar Students Association, the ASA, had built this tent and started living there after they were thrown out of the hostel by the university management on charges that were later proven to be false and foisted under pressure from BJP leaders. They named the tent Vellivada, a Telugu word for the Dalit ghetto located on the fringes of a typical Indian village. After Rohit's death, the Vellivada had suddenly become cool. A crew of freestyle rappers was on stage. The lead vocalist had weaved in a few verses from Rohit's suicide note. The crowd cheered loudly every time he said Vemula or from the shadows to the stars, yo. Those were the only words the Ambedkarites in the audience got. They sat and stared at his blinking clothes for the rest. When the rapper finished his set, one ASA leader shouted into the mic, Jai 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 Bhim. Everybody joined the chorus. Phule Ambedkar Savitri. In another first, in another first for the mainstream media, Dalit bylines started appearing in the opinion columns of mainstream newspapers. Editors of newspapers and websites vied to publish opinions of radical Dalit scholars. Barely a word was snipped, and not a single copy was toned down. The movement for social justice that his death triggered not only scalded the ruling BJP, but also started a fierce public inquiry into the historical role played by the so-called secular political parties towards the emancipation of Dalits. Suddenly, and perhaps for the first time, leaders of an autonomous Dalit movement were in a position to snatch the mic away from people who queued up to show solidarity at the dharna. To each party that tried to break into this new commune called Ambedkarism, they asked just one simple question. Where were you until now? The betrayal of Ambedkar and Dalits by the Congress was raked up. Only the media and around 40 students, mostly from the Congress-backed NSUI, stayed back to welcome Rahul Gandhi on his second visit to the protest site. The rest, about 1,000, walked off calling the Congress a casteist party. Open quotes. This is the same party that used and threw Bagbu Jagjivan Ram and Mallikarjun Kharge, an ASA activist said on his way out of the Vellivada as Rahul Gandhi was making his way in. Political illiterates who thought leftists and Ambedkarites are the same thing were confused. The left too was halted at the gates as it tried to sneak into the agitation with alternating shouts of Lal Salam and Neel Salam. When senior leaders of the CPI and the CPM came to show their support, they were welcomed by Ambedkarite students with cold stares and Facebook posts such as this, open quotes, how can we trust the Indian communists whose greatest leader is EMS Nambudripal, the same man who called Ambedkar a separatist and opposed his demand for separate electorates for Dalits, saying this was a great blow to the freedom movement, for this led to the diversion of people's attention from the objectives of full independence to the mundane cause of the upliftment of the Harijans. Arvind Kejriwal, was heckled over his close association with an anti-reservation group called Youth for Equality. Even the JNU leaders Shehla Rashid and Kanhaiya Kumar were not spared by the ASA activists who guarded the Vellivada like sphinxes. Pass the Ambedkar quiz and enter. Merely shouting slogans such as Neel Salam and Jai Bhim wasn't going to work. Far from ruining the possibility of an alliance, the Ambedkarite criticism of mainstream political formations after Rohit Vemula's death acted as a hammer on hot metal in the first few months. It started giving shape to what seemed like a stable but slightly brittle new alloy. The Ambedkarites and communists were at the core, and all types of anti-BJP elements hovered around. The crowds kept pouring into the Vellivada as I made 2 more trips to the campus in February and in early March 2016 to report for the Hindustan Times. By the time I took a sabbatical from my newspaper and settled into a room on the campus in April to work on this book, the crowds at the Vellivada had thinned. On the 22nd of March, little over a week before I arrived, the police had caned hundreds of protesters inside the campus. 2 teachers and 25 students were in prison on rioting charges. Almost every anti-ABVP students' union in the campus had somebody in jail. The last large gathering at the Vellivada was on the night of April 5, 2016, when the 27 people were released from prison. It was a spectacular night. At least 3,000 students came out to welcome them. Each marched with a flaming torch in one hand and a party flag in the other. Different shades of not just reds and blues, but also the greens of groups such as the Muslim Students Federation, the Students Islamic Organization, the multicolored Buddhist flag, and the rainbow of the queer pride movement. The movement also died that night. It was the funeral procession of the hashtag Justice for Rohit Vemula campaign. Students had criminal cases against them, submission deadlines had been breached, career plans had got disrupted. Everybody went back into their shells to lick their wounds. It seemed at the time that all I had to do was document the history of another failed mutiny by the meek, a neat compilation of Rohit Vemula's personal history and his political career on campus, plus the highlights of the agitation that followed his death. A few weeks in, I realized that the story wasn't yet over. The Dalit uprising, which started as a campus quake, had created ripples that were now rocking other parts of the country. In 6 months between January 17th, the day he died, and July 17th, Rohit's mother Radhika Vemula and brother Raja Vemula had attended 134 meetings and protest demonstrations by Dalit groups across India. Raja estimates that they were forced to reject at least another 300 such invitations. They were invited to meetings in the US, UK, France, Singapore and Australia, but couldn't go because they didn't have the papers. The surge continued beyond 6 months. On the 19th of July, 1 lakh Dalits shut down central Mumbai for several hours to protest the demolition of the Ambedkar Bhavan. Radhika and Raja were the star presence in that meeting too. There were 2 remarkable things about this protest in Mumbai. First, the diversity of the leaders on the dais. Members of the Communist Party, alongside Ambedkar's own grandson and former MP Prakash Ambedkar, as well as several Congress leaders. The links forged in January appear to have held. Second, no single speech ended without an invocation to quote-unquote Shaheed Rohit Vemula. Dancing among the blue flags and the red flags and the multicolored Buddhist flags that the crowds carried were hundreds of posters of a handsome young man dressed in a green checkered shirt with its first 2 buttons open. He had the thickest head of the blackest hair, a 3-day stubble, and a sparkling, toothy smile. Rohit Vemula was by now being called a phenomenon. Prakash Ambedkar said this was the biggest nationwide Dalit uprising since the times of Ambedkar. He called it, open quotes, the post-Rohit phase of the anti-caste struggle. On July 11, 7 Dalits were flogged by cattle vigilantes in the Una town of Gujarat. In one spectacular move, Dalits across the state stopped skinning and disposing cattle. Hundreds of rotting carcasses littered every village and town of Gujarat. There were protests all over the country, and at least 30 Dalits attempted to commit suicide to condemn the Una attack. It was being called a Dalit mutiny. Within days, Hindustan Times called me out of my sabbatical in Hyderabad and sent me to Una. Every one of the Dalits I met as I travelled across Gujarat for the next month had heard of what had happened in Hyderabad. Some remembered the name Rohit Vemula, some didn't. A few even claimed to have read the Gujarati translation of Rohit Vemula's soul-crushing suicide note. But everybody had seen the photo of a smiling young man wearing a green checkered shirt who was forced to commit suicide because of casteist harassment. When 30,000 Dalits gathered on July 31 at Ahmedabad to protest the Una attack, the same smiling photograph bobbed among the crowds along with blue flags and red flags. The leader of the Gujarat mutiny was a young Dalit lawyer, Jignesh Mewani. He was calling for unity between the left and the Ambedkarites. Like Rohit, Mewani too believed that the class struggle and the anti-caste movement should intersect. And he was militant. He was openly threatening to break bones of those who dared to attack Dalits. When Radhika Vemula visited Una town for the August 15th rally, she said, "I see Jignesh Mewani and I think my son Rohit has taken rebirth." When I returned to Hyderabad in the last week of August 2016, JNU, the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and HCU were gearing up for elections. Although Ambedkarites and Marxists were working together in other parts of the country, the decades-old ideological war between the two sides had broken out once again on the campuses. Senior leaders of the Ambedkarite and communist movements watched helplessly as their younger ideologues in HCU and JNU threw passages from red books and blue books at each other on social media. All this was largely thanks to a 2-year-old organization in JNU, Birsa Ambedkar Phule Students Association, BAPSA, and its magnetic leader, Rahul Sonpimple, a Dalit rickshaw driver's son. It became a triangular fight between a left alliance, the right-wing ABVP, and the BAPSA. The BAPSA called for unity of the oppressed and sought to bring all marginalized identities under one umbrella. They took the line that the Indian communists and the Hindu supremacists represented two forms of Brahminical hegemony. BAPSA wanted autonomous power for peoples from oppressed communities, Dalits, Adivasis, Bahujans, religious minorities, and sexuality minorities. They believed in the class struggle too, but they wanted the left to replace their upper caste leadership with leaders from oppressed communities. In one of their pamphlets, they said, the Indian left must publicly acknowledge that their upper caste leaders have failed to play the role of revolutionary vanguards. They must accept that the revolution can only be delivered by a leadership that has a lived experience of oppression. They knew not just Ambedkarite polemics, but Marxist jargon too. BAPSA went up alone in the JNU elections against the combined force of all the left organizations on campus. Kanhaiya Kumar, Shahla Rashid, and Umar Khalid campaigned hard for the alliance. But the only person the media was interested in was the son of the Dalit rickshaw driver who was saying, open quotes, "The left has always asked for votes by pointing to Gabbar," which was a reference to the ABVP. "I want to tell you that this time there will be no left, no right. This election will be won by Kabali," the Dalit protagonist played by Rajnikant in his last film. Sonpimple was scholarly and articulate, fresh and forceful. The Left Alliance went on to sweep the elections, but the irony is that nobody remembers who their president is. Everybody remembers it for the fact that BAPSA and Sonpimple had come within 150 votes of defeating the left in JNU, its last bastion. The national leaders of the left and Ambedkarite movements were disturbed by what happened in JNU. They worked to ensure that the same thing didn't repeat in the Hyderabad University. The ASA proposed PhD scholar Vijay Kumar Paddapudi, the son of a security guard and one of the 4 students suspended along with Rohit, as the presidential candidate. But the left-wing SFI wanted the same post and formed an alliance with smaller Dalit, Adivasi and Bahujan groups to keep the ASA out. The ASA decided to follow the BAPSA example and responded with this statement. Initially, the ASA was for the joint forum. In these elections, by proposing one of the socially boycotted students would contest the elections for the post of president. But few organizations were not in agreement with the idea of joint forum due to their ideological differences. So we decided to move on independently on account of the following reasons. 1, the betrayal by the so-called progressive groups has made us realize, and this is, I think, very important, the betrayal by the so-called progressive groups has made us realize that as long as we are seen as pitiful victims, everybody wants to show solidarity and extend support. But the moment we start speaking for ourselves and attempt to become architects of our own destiny, barriers will be created for us by the same forces who shed crocodile tears for us. We decided that enough is enough. For too long have others spoken on our behalf. It is time we spoke for ourselves. The point number 2, once we decided to unchain our voices and our core Ambedkarite ideology from the petty concerns of coalition politics, the question before us was, who among us is in the best position to represent us, the oppressed communities? The answer came to us instantly. Only a person who has experienced oppression. Who else in this campus has faced the worst form of oppression? Who else in this campus knows what social exclusion is better than a person who has faced it firsthand? Who in this campus has faced the brutal might of the Indian state? Who else in this campus has spent 14 bitterly cold nights out in the open in his fight against Hindutva and casteist bigots? The hypocritical forces have come up with the slogan, "Say no to ABVP." Who else in this campus has taken on the ABVP frontally? The answer, of course, is Vijay Kumar Peddapudi. We also realized that the so-called progressive forces had played a very clever game to split the unity of the oppressed by fielding SC/ST candidates and OBC candidates for the post of Vice President, General Secretary, Joint Secretary, Cultural Secretary, and Sports Secretary. How could we field candidates against our own brothers and sisters? We decided that we will not play into the hands of these soft Brahminical forces by drawing swords against our own people. We decided to take the high road and withdrew all our candidates who had filed nominations for VP, GS, JS, CS posts. It was the obvious choice before us, and we did not blink an eye before taking this decision. We feel only love and affection and solidarity towards the other candidates and want to wish them the best of luck. Through our decision to field just one candidate, Vijay Kumar Peddapudi, we have effectively turned these student elections into a presidential race. We have turned this into a battle between three ideologies represented by the colors saffron, red, and blue. The question before you, dear students, is which ideology is capable of bringing real and sustainable social change? The ideology that led to the death of Rohit Vemula, or the ideology that gave us the Indian Constitution? We urge you not to reduce this fight for petty campus level positions, but to elevate it to a fight over the idea of India. You are the intellectuals of this country. You are the scholars and the thinking people. The whole country is watching eagerly for a message from the students of the campus where Rohit Vemula sacrificed his life. It is up to you now to decide what that message should be. Hashtag vote for self-respect. Hashtag vote for Vijay Peddapudi. Hashtag power to the oppressed. Hashtag power to socially boycotted. Hashtag Rohit Vemula lives. Rohit Vemula's ghost had come back to haunt the campus. The ASA made one of his now famous Facebook posts part of all its campaign material. Open quotes, "Only radical Ambedkar can liberate us." The JNU story had repeated in Hyderabad. When the results were declared, the Left Alliance won. But the ASA managed to get a massive share of the votes for its presidential candidate and emerged as the party with the single largest vote share. The Ambedkarites declared ideological victory and said they had been defeated electorally, but their idea had won. The celebrations by the Left Alliance were subdued. Some left student leaders who had played a key role in the agitation for Rohit Vemula openly accepted that they had taken a wrong stand in the elections. The ASA celebrations and sloganeering went on till 5 in the morning. They also had a new slogan, "Jai Jai 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 Bhim, Son Pimple Vijay Vemula." People might not remember Tina Dabi, but they won't be able to forget Rohit Vemula. He set newsrooms across the country on fire. No other Dalit, dead or alive, not even Ambedkar, has managed to do that in the history of Indian mainstream journalism. If anything, Rohit's death has resurrected Ambedkar and taken him into spaces where they only knew him as hashtag the father of the Constitution. The Rohit Vemula is India's Trayvon Martin. The question, therefore, is not whether a book should be written about Rohit, but what it should be about. And the next section in this proposal is, who was Rohit Vemula? I've said so much about him. Rohit entered the ASA just 2 years before he died. Before that, he was a Marxist and part of the Students' Federation of India, the CPIM's student wing. He quit the SFI and refused to join the agitation following the suicide of Dalit scholar Madhuri Venkatesh in 2013. Although disillusioned by the left in India, Rohit still believed in Marxism. He believed that true political alternatives can emerge only when the class struggle and the caste struggle combine. Rohit Vemula was a new age Ambedkarite, an advanced prototype that had emerged from the errors and complexities of past experiments. He understood why Dalits on campus had to use the implicit threat of violence as a deterrent and as a political tool. He saw the ASA set in the tradition of the Black Panthers of the US and the Dalit Panthers of India. But for somebody committed to the Panthers line, it is remarkable that Rohit was able to see the gender contradictions in the ASA. Within months of joining, he forced the almost all-male ASA to change its attitude towards women. He was passionate about LGBTQI issues and made the ASA for the first time organize a program to show solidarity with the cause of sexuality minorities. This was new politics for a Dalit group. The old guard stepped aside when he barged into a general body meeting of the ASA in 2015 and announced the appointment of 2 non-Dalit women to key posts. In fact, almost the entire executive committee of the ASA in 2015-16 was appointed by Rohit. Some of his seniors who made way for his will had been fierce fighters in their own time. They had spent over a decade at the helm of the ASA. Rohit had been in the organization for just 1 year at the time. My book, which is tentatively titled Untouchable Star, is a deep dive into Rohit Vemula's memories, his world, his people, and the events that led to his death. The characters in this book are significantly different from those in most Dalit narratives of the past. This is about a people who suddenly find themselves in a world where the barbarism of open untouchability has been replaced with more sophisticated methods of exclusion. The university where Rohit and his Dalit comrades study is a miniature version of post-slavery and post-segregation USA or post-apartheid South Africa. Excuse me. Like racism in the white world, casteism has taken on new forms on Indian campuses. As a living space, it is not as segregated as the village and yet denies you the luxury of anonymity that a big city offers. Everybody here knows who the Dalit students are. The village has been replaced by the university, the landlord has been replaced by the research guide. In place of a caste panchayat, there is a proctorial board and an academic council. English is the new Sanskrit. Sanskritic codes that had protected the Brahminic way of life from being imitated have been replaced by linguistic and social codes borrowed from American sitcoms. The whole structure seems designed for the exclusion of Dalits, and yet the campus is where they are strongest. The persistent theme of my book is the interplay between a modern, powerful, and militant Dalit organization and an academic institution that is resisting new ideas. A space where world-renowned scholars of comparative literature teach subaltern studies and African-American literature in the same classroom where they humiliate Dalit students for not speaking and writing in proper English. Untouchable Star is an oral histories project for the social anthropologist. I can't even say that word, I'm not an investigative report for legal eagles. It is hyper-local, yet a powerful commentary on the universal. It is an attempt to see India and the world through a grain of sand, a speck of stardust. As you enter Rohit Vemula's shadows, a swarm of stories comes rushing out at you from the darkness. Personal stories of the people he sprang from, grew up with, embraced, fought and forgave before leaving this world. Some of these stories melt into each other, some stand alone. All of them gather into a swirling storm at the eye of which is Rohit Vemula. But for the 15-year-old studying in a school where English is mostly taught in Telugu, this story will be an epic saga unfolding before her eyes like cinema. The story is made of 4 basic elements: the personal, the political, the historical, and the contemporary. At its skeletal level, the book will trace 2 histories: the history of Rohit's family and the history of his organization, the ASA. The family, a brief note about that. The family history starts in the mid-1970s with the adoption of Rohit's mother, Radhika Vemula. The history of the ASA, no, I think this is something that has been cut out. Anyway, the family's history starts in the mid-1970s with the adoption of Rohit Vemula's mother, Radhika Vemula, into a non-Dalit family. The history of the ASA starts in 1988 when the first radical Dalit group was formed on the campus called the Dalit Students Liberation Tigers. The principal narrators of the family story are Rohit's mother Radhika, brother Raja, and friend Syed Riaz. This story is set in Guntur and provides an insight into the inner workings of intercaste relationships. The pathos and the existentialist crisis of Raja, Radhika, and Rohit, who are struggling to understand who they really are and where they belong. Their inability to shed the history of their bloodline and integrate fully into the family that adopted them. Cuckoo's eggs in a crow's nest. Radhika, a Mala Dalit, was adopted by a dominant caste Vadera family and married away to a Vadera man who broke up with her after he discovered her caste. Raja and Rohit could never really settle into an identity. As they were growing up, the Vadderas treated them as Dalits, and the Dalits of the neighborhood treated them as Vadderas. Raja was born in the kitchen of his father's house because by the time he was due, his mother's caste had been discovered by her in-laws. They refused to take Radhika to a hospital for the delivery. Radhika says that jalebis were her favorite sweet. When she was pregnant with Raja, her husband Mani Kumar would eat jalebis in front of her without offering her any. It's not all dark. The most endearing part of this entire saga is Rohit's friendship with Riyaz. These chapters are full of laughter, teenage bravado, proposals and love letters, and hope. Two friends, one Dalit, one Muslim, riding out into the world. Their bromance, although deeply personal and local, is also a totem of both the political and the universal. Who else can the untouchable be truly friends with but the beef-eating Muslim? What political options do Dalits and Muslims have in this country but to ally with each other? This combination is Hindutva's kryptonite. The ASA, a small note about that. Rohit's story is inseparable from the story of the ASA, and the story of the ASA is inseparable from the story of the organizations before it. The story is narrated by 5 generations of Dalit students who passed through the Hyderabad Central University. Among them are students who knew Rohit intimately and witnessed his evolution from a science nerd into a fierce anti-caste activist. It is a story of campus politics, ideological fractions, biased professors, unfriendly classmates, identities within identities within identities, unscrupulous administrators, forged documents, traitors, shapeshifters, mercenaries, police in cahoots with judges, in cahoots with government, in cahoots with Rohit's killers. The story of Rohit Vemula is conceived in this context. In the narrative of the book, these two parallel narratives, the story of the family and the story of ASA, intersect and merge at the point where Rohit enters the campus. Rohit is the bright streak in this braid of overlapping histories and keeps coming up in the conversation as the cast narrates their own stories. The final scene of this epic story is hidden somewhere in the... Okay, never mind. This is a part that I should have cut out. But I'll leave you with the part that you also spoke about, which is an excerpt from my life, which is a personal narrative I started working on because the writing for the book was not really coming through. But it has turned into a book in itself. So it's, again, it's titled Going Dalit, and it's about my journey back into where I come from. The Karnataka State Assembly elections just went by, FYI. I'm sure you couldn't care less. At this point, neither do I. Most people don't care about politics. They never have. I didn't too. I do now. But I think we'll both have so much fun if I just cut to the time Khan put a 6-inch kurup on a police coodie's arm when we were just in our teens. There you go. If you like those kinds of stories, I could take you to area right now and find you some fresh ones, because the ones I have are stale from my childhood in Area Nagar. And it's not the real name of the place. They pay people to take them into such spaces nowadays. Reporters from Delhi and New York do. In their bills, they list these local historians as fixers, like fitter, turner, carpenter, plumber, fixer. If you don't understand that police coodie, okay, this is an excerpt, so this is, okay, another excerpt that Anupama helped me pull out. If you don't understand that police coodies are all about catching the wrong guy, you've probably never been inside a station. Just the other day, I was getting a haircut and some boys from the slum near Baipanhalli metro station came in. They had traveled 8 kilometers through the dense traffic just because they loved how our guys styled their hair. All of them were dressed in the latest skinny fits, and some had crazy hairdos on. The moment they came in, they hooked a phone to the speakers and blasted the title track from Paranjit's Kala. They were going for the first day, first show. One of them, a guy with the most beautiful classic afro, was asking the barber to chop it all off. The others were asking him to keep it. I joined them and the barber and another waiting customer to advise him to keep it. He said he wanted to keep it, but the police coolies were after his life to chop it off. I'm not sure if it was KR station or Baipanhalli. They had stopped him many times and even dragged him by his hair in front of his girlfriend. They just hated his hair. I didn't have my phone. I made him take my number and call me, and asked him to call me, saying I would get my reporter contacts to put a rivet on the police coolies. He never called. Police coolies just need an excuse to put a rivet. The thing they hated most was fashionable Kala boys. You could get a rivet sometimes just for having too much swag. Our boys were doing mohawks, cornrows and braids when no European footballer was doing it. As far back as the early 1990s, and the police coolies hated it even then. They would drag them by their hair in front of their girlfriends when they were on a date. They would first tulp them properly and then make them pay for the barber to shave their heads off. Then they would take some more money before letting them go. They never did the same thing to couples that hung around in Coffee Day or Purple Haze. But we didn't always take it. This one time, Candy and Silky chucked stones at police coolies who came looking for us in a Hoysala van. They reversed and didn't come back for half an hour, by which time we were gone. One time, stones came flying out of the bushes opposite the Jeevan Bhimanagar police station and smashed the windows. The sentry ran inside for cover, leaving his .303 rifle behind. I'm serious, stones came flying out on their own. Those days, there was no petrol bunk in front of the station, just empty land where they parked seized vehicles, overgrown by the allergic Congress weed. While the one experience in lockup was enough to scare and scar me for life, my friends were much stronger than me. I had only a few minor run-ins with the police coolies after my rivet. But my friends got bolder. Some lost their fear for police coolies altogether, like how Khan put a 6-inch kurup on, and that almost, I'll repeat this, sorry. Smokers beware. Like how Khan put a 6-inch kurup that almost separated a police coolie's arm from his body. Those were the 90s for us. During the same years, Kashmiris with AKs were playing catch with the police coolies, jumping from this side of the fence to that. They wanted Azadi. The Khalistan movement had started petering out. The Tamil Tigers were at the peak of their popularity in the Tamil-speaking populations of Bangalore. My own first cousins, Michael Dada and Sudan Dada, who live in Bangalore, were hardcore LTTE supporters in those days. They were also walking around with photos of Velupulai Pravakaran in their wallets. My cousins also share my Bengali surname, but their father married a Tamil. They don't know a word of Bengali. My dadas lost their photos in their wallets and their ideology after Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated and the crackdown started. Before the assassination, there was a huge drawing of the LTTE tiger right outside Pulu's house. There were rumors about tigers hiding in area all the time. Most of the Tamil punters talking about the Elam and were talking about Elam and protecting the tigers from the police coolies. It was a time of great excitement and a time when there was great fear of the police coolies. And despite the fear, people were challenging the police coolies. An HAL employee had helped find a house on rent in Tippasandra for the LTTE cadres involved in the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case. That house was just 10 minutes by cycle from our old house near the old Om Shakti temple. The HAL unit where he worked was 5 minutes away. The day the special investigation team raided his house, there were hundreds of police coolies with automatic guns everywhere. One of the tigers swallowed cyanide and died before they could catch him. Pulu said he knew that HAL employee and the tigers who were hiding in the house. He said he had played football with them. He said he played football with them at HAL Sports Club. Pulu was always full of such stories. He would tell them to his shishyas as they would spread it all over area with their own special masala. There were stories of police coolies conducting chapas, jumping over rooftops and surrounding all escape gullies, picking up boys all over East Bangalore, Gautampura, Ejipura, Jeevanhalli, Kalpalli, Nellurupuram, Anandapuram, Sudhamnagar, Murphy Town, Alsur, Lakshmipuram, Damlur, Dupanhalli. These are not the only large Tamil settlements in the city. I'm sure similar things were happening in LR Nagar, Swepings Road, Cotton Pit, Hennur, Lingarajpuram, Tannery Road, Shivaji Nagar. On the other side of the world, the LA riots were breaking out. It was the days of rap battles and hip-hop crews were dissing each other. East Coast, West Coast. We didn't understand much of what was happening those days, but we got a sense because the music of Biggie and Tupac and Ice Cube was reaching us. We had heard "Fuck the Police." One of the boys had also drawn it with charcoal on the wall outside NAL school. I remember the elections from that time. Okay, there's also another funny excerpt in the middle of nowhere. But I have never, ever, in the 25 years that I have known and fought in Creeks alongside him, seen fear on Khan's face. And this is a part of the book where I'm actually, basically, the book started, and I was compelled to start writing it because of the elections, the Karnataka elections, which were, for the first time in my reporting career, you know, as a journalist, I'm sitting in my house on a sabbatical. Elections are happening outside my house, and I said, wow, I'm getting to see it as a voter, not as a reporter. And I got to see what happened to my friends, so this is an excerpt from that section of the book. I had never ever, in the 25 years that I had known and fought in Creeks alongside him, seen fear on Khan's face. He was our Maqbool Bhatt, Burhan Wani, and Black Panther, and Kala Seth, all rolled in one. I don't think you would know Kala Seth. Let's say if he wanted something delivered to somebody, we would never do it without Khan's support. I couldn't believe it. Most of our boys couldn't believe it. Somebody had dared to tulp Khan in these elections. That too in front of everybody. That too in front of the Ambedkar statue junction. He was the most respected Pantru since Pullu was murdered in the 1990s. Actually, you can't compare Khan with Pullu because Pullu was a social worker and upcoming political leader. No, they didn't tulp him because he's Muslim. In fact, Khan from the epiglottis is not Muslim. He's from the Nayaka scheduled tribe community from East Karnataka. We all just called him Khan. Even the police knew him as Khan. I guess people started calling him that because somebody said Khan means boss. And how can I forget the slight fear I saw in Mamam and Baba's face in these elections when we went out to vote. We couldn't find Baba's name on the list for quite some time. For a moment we thought somebody deleted his name, his Christian name, on purpose. Did you put your full name? Mamam asked in Bengali, so no one could understand. Puro naamta dhalle naki? Baba looked confused for a bit and then straightened up to say, yeah, obviously, what's wrong? In English. He doesn't speak in Bengali when he's unsettled. His Bengali is still not very good. Anyway, Doggy, Baba and me, Doggy found Baba's name on another list and everything turned out okay. We all voted Congress, all of us, including Laila. Only Baba was happy with his vote. The rest of us felt uneasy. I think I'll stop here, if you'll allow me. There's some excerpts which are a little out of context, but this is the sense of what I'm trying to achieve with this second book, which actually will turn out to be the first book that I write, or release actually. So that's me. Thank you for your time.
Hi everyone, and thank you Shudipto. That was riveting and moving and deliciously sharp, all of those things. So I can't wait to read the book, or both books. And thank you Anu for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. In reading your reportage on Rohit Vemula and also your writing on your own Dalit formation, I was struck by how mixed caste origins shape the narrative in both cases. Ambedkar, in a 1916 paper presented at an anthropology seminar right here at Columbia, observed that caste was reproduced through the bodies of women. To put it crudely, for caste to be, intermarriage can't be. Or in Ambedkar's words, endogamy is the essence of caste, and a key to the mystery of the caste system. In this framework, outmarriage should spell the annihilation of caste. And certainly that's the axiom among Hindus from the Caribbean. We're preoccupied with origins and with the mystery of our own origins. I should say that I am a Caribbean Hindu. I'm Guyanese American. But you know, if there's one thing we think we know, we feel we know confidently, it's that caste no longer matters in any real way in the diaspora descended from indenture. The seas we crossed, the physical passage through the Kalapani or dark waters led to a loss of caste according to Hindu orthodoxy. And the condition aboard the indenture ships and on the plantations also meant that rules around ritual purity couldn't be maintained. You couldn't choose what you ate or who you ate it with, for instance. Who you had sex with also shifted. So gender enlivens the transformation even further. I really love the eloquent way that a Dalit woman in the documentary Jai Bhim Comrade described herself. She said she belonged to the caste of woman. Among the indentured, there was a shortage of women, and this meant that intimate relationships couldn't proceed along caste lines. The indentured were recruited from among all castes, equally high, middle, and low. But women, likely Brahmin widows, predominated among the upper caste. So in 1898, for instance, women made up more than 2/3 of upper caste migrants to British Guyana, although they made up less than 1/3 of all the indentured. At least some of these Brahmin coolie women, how's that for a combustible collision of identities? At least some of them had to partner with men of lower caste. Endogamy in this context was constantly transgressed. Mixed origins are common for descendants of indenture. The two primary forces that supposedly erase caste, intimate relationships across caste boundaries and movement across oceans, are the forces that made quote-unquote coolies. I've been asked to read a little from my work, and I'd like to share a passage from Tales of the Sea, which is an essay that speaks to the ways that migration, even a semi-forced migration like indenture was, can be liberating, at least in the longue durée across generations. I think it also speaks to the persistence, if not of caste itself, of a feeling about caste. It's from the Griffith Review, which is a magazine based in Australia, and it ran in their January issue on the Commonwealth. My great uncle, who was dying in London, who did die before the summer was out, believed in Europe. Once an economist for the Commonwealth Secretariat, Uncle Vish was an internationalist. He was a man of the world, but he certainly did not begin that way. He was the son of a rice mill owner who had gone bankrupt and the grandson of indentured plantation workers. Until he sailed to London at 21, he had only known an unelectrified coastal stretch of cane and paddy in Guyana's far countryside, on the periphery of the periphery. Over my many years in and out of London, plunging into archives, I'd grown closer to my great uncle. When I was a child, an ocean away in a working class American city with a backside view of the Statue of Liberty, he was held up as an icon, a remote symbol of gentility and success. In London, this great uncle was suddenly talking to me about ideas, as if we were equals, and this endeared him to me. I loved him also because I could see my grandmother, his younger sister, in his face. His smile, a kind of sheepish grin, was hers entirely. He would take me to tea and we would chat about ideas and about his life. His mind ranged over history, politics, international relations. Sometimes spiritual and philosophical questions preoccupied him. A rational man suspicious of dogma, he seemed to be trying to work out his own pact with his ancestral Hindu faith. He would take me to tea at his club along Pall Mall, the spacious avenue hushing everyone and everything with the seriousness of its classical stone facades and the weight of their columns. The Royal Automobile Club was a place where elderly and overwhelmingly white gentlemen wearing three-piece suits sat in elegant leather chairs, reading the Times in the middle of the day. The concierge who took my great-uncle's coat and the waiters who served us salmon sandwiches called him Dr. Prasad. He was comfortable in his skin there. The club was near St. James's Square, around the corner from Marlborough House, the old royal residence that serves as headquarters for the Commonwealth Secretariat. It was one of the first places my great-uncle showed me in London. I remember him telling me at the time that Prime Minister William Gladstone had often dined there with Queen Victoria. This mattered because the Prime Minister's father was also the father of indenture. John Gladstone, a sugar planter and parliamentarian, had dreamed up the scheme of transporting indentured Indians to replace emancipated Africans so that his estates in British Guyana wouldn't lose their supply of unfree labor. That my great-uncle, a grandson of coolies ferried across the seas, should put his intellect to work in the house where Gladstone had done the same was clearly a matter of pride to him. When the HMS Hillary sailed up through the Caribbean Sea and into the Atlantic Ocean in 1954, with my great-uncle Bishnadath Prasad aboard, it was charting a course to the wider world for him. It was freeing him from his provincial origins. At the time, however, that wasn't completely clear to him. At our final tea at the RAC, the October before he died, he confided, "When I came to London, England was not my mother country." He was a country coolie, as the slur went among Guyana's anglicized and overwhelmingly black or Creole urban elite. Afro-Saxon was the slur in kind. He lacked capital, social, cultural, and financial. He had no university degree, nor was he Christian. London was rough with him during his first years there. The years immediately after the SS Empire Windrush landed the first large group of Caribbean immigrants to England. The city was just barely hanging on as an imperial capital when Britain started to see its first significant wave of immigrants from the places it had colonized. They were not just scattered students and seamen, but thousands of laborers from the brown and black territories of the Commonwealth, hired to fell forests in Scotland, man factories in Manchester, serve as attendants with the railways in London. Like the rest, Uncle Vish faced discrimination and hardship. For years, he sold tickets for the London Underground. Back home, he'd won a copy of the collected works of Shakespeare for placing first in junior Cambridge exams. And then he taught high school, as so many gifted students who lacked the money for higher education overseas did. Everyone believed he had a bright future ahead. They expected him to get a degree. He would be the first in our family to go to university. But that ambition proved elusive for a long time. Abroad on that cold, distant island, sadness sometimes undid him, and the family had to send his older sister to care for him. And I'm going to jump ahead. The last time I saw Uncle Vish, I arrived at the hospice just as a Hindu priest, who apparently made rounds there, was administering last rites. The man touched a drop of holy water to Uncle Vish's lips with a leaf, whispered into his ear, tied a henna thread around his wrist, and left the room. Uncle Vish, who had not asked for a pundit, fiddled with the red string for an agitated moment. Then, recovering his composure with a chuckle, he made a coolly dismissive comment about Brahmins and their abuses, and asked that the thread be removed. His daughter-in-law cut him free from it. Uncle Vish, half a century removed from a rural Hindu past, had no attachments to ritual. He did not believe in caste, nor have much use for pundits. One would certainly not be brokering his last voyage. So I chose to read that passage because I think there's an interesting resistance to caste. There was an interesting resistance to caste in my uncle's final moments. but actually the very fact that caste was being resisted after a lifetime journey from country coolie to Windrush immigrant to the Commonwealth Secretariat suggests that it must still have had some meaning. And we can talk more about that in the Q&A if there's interest. And I think with that, we'll just shift to talking to Sudipto over here. Yeah.
So I actually was. So they're mic'd up. So I had really wanted to bring in Gayatra's voice and the ways in which she writes about the worlds of indenture and gender and caste and labor, and the ways in which it both evokes worlds but also speaks to other kinds of transformations and journeys that have a kind of affinity, perhaps, what you said, the feeling of caste, but perhaps not caste. And I think one of the questions that you raised is also about this question of identity and the ways in which you, Sudipto, in other places write about your own identity, right? And the ways in which that kind of mixed, I think you call it a kind of mixed caste presence, actually alters and unsettles any kind of easy relationship both to caste and to caste politics. So I wonder if either or both of you wanted to think about that, or to the ways in which questions of labor and moving out, the very experience of indenture in a sense, and that very deep unsettling actually creates perhaps the notion of impossible possibilities and connections with home, but also displaces you in some fundamental way. But it would be interesting to think about what is caste and what is caste-like and what else is happening through these movements.
For me?
Both of you. And then we'll open it up to questions.
From your context, please.
Yeah. Well, I put out a call when I was invited to be part of this conversation, because my instinctual response was, I'm not an expert on caste. In the Caribbean, our trouble is race, not caste. So I really wanted to be able to offer something more than my own experience or family history in this conversation. And I did hear from a few people who told me the same things, or said that their families shared the same sense of having let go of caste, that there was a blurring of distinctions and sub-distinctions. There was only a kind of ceremonial sense of Brahmins. So, but as my great uncle's story shows, there's also a connection between Brahmins and sort of charlatanism, if that makes any sense.
Charlatanism.
Charlatanism. In Guyana, there is a sense that they are sort of like con men, because first of all, how do we know that they're Brahmin? They could have simply landed up and anointed them as themselves to be, and then just gone about kind of fleecing everyone. But the language is also interesting. People of my grandparents' generation, they don't use caste terms really. They use high nation and low nation. So if you're upper caste, you're high nation. If you're lower caste, you're low nation. And I don't have anything particularly deep to say about that, except I'm really struck by that shift to nation states and geopolitics. They use the word nation, but I mean, and that's also an imagined community, right?
Some interesting thoughts there. So, firstly, this mixed caste identity, and talking about it, considering Ambedkar proposed it as one of the ways in which you could overcome caste distinctions, and then, so therefore now I am in a position to, look at that talisman and see if that really works in practical terms, because I suppose everybody wants family, but everybody also wants community. So for someone like me, where is my community is the big question. And obviously, I am from I'm from Bengal. One part of the family, my father's side of the family, is from Bangladesh and all of that. And I was raised in Bangalore, in this neighborhood that you just heard about. So there are all these factors at play, and identifying who you belong to becomes a very difficult thing. You just start identifying your politics, or your politics are shaped by your immediate neighborhood and those kind of things. But this mixed caste experience, I would want to look at it also. I'm very interested to look at it from the point of what happens between that intercaste couple. Whose culture dominates whose, right? Like that for me is the biggest question, because obviously my household was, my mother was a very, very big influence in telling us, in creating the right atmosphere at home, where why is it that I am the first graduate from my father's side of the family? It's because of my mother's influence. Because in my father's family, they married within their community, and as a result, that kind of enabling environment was not there. So therefore, that's the first point, which is I have to flag my privilege. But in that privilege is also this sense of homelessness, the sense of not belonging, this repeated thing of, when upper caste come up to you, they ask you what's Dalit about you. And when Dalits come up to you, they ask you what's Dalit about you. So, you don't know what's Dalit about you. So what is it? Is it my skin color? Is it my body? Is it my genes? What is Dalit? Is it a biological category? Thank goodness for the vision of Ambedkar, that he made that point very clear, saying there is not a biological category, and the struggle that I'm having is a social struggle. It's not a actually if you look at it, if you analyze people genetically, you probably find that we are all the same people. So that is the thing, and that for me was a huge as an Ambedkarite, I had to also explore what he means to me, right? So yes, so therefore that part, but then I'm very uncomfortable with what sometimes, with my mother I have a lot of run-ins. I called her casteist, I called her all sorts of things. After I became woke, the first person you go after is your mother, right? So, I go to, yeah, even before, yeah, because she's the one who introduced me to modern thought. She's the one who gave me Archie's and Enid Blyton and all of that. Though we're living in the slum, my economic experience was slum, my social experience was a little mixed again. So mine is the Obama phenomenon. I'm the bastard prince, in that sense. That I'm, where's my blood? In terms of, if I were, let's assume I were an aristocrat, right? Would I be anointed king or not? Would the Ghosh family, to which my mom belongs, which had a zamindari, have accepted me as their rightful heir? Right, those are the questions, and these put lives such as ours at crossroads, really. Ambedkar as a thinker proposing something for the emancipation of Dalits, for transformation in Indian society, has its place, and it has a very high place in our mind. But when it plays out on our bodies, it played out on my body. The sense that keeps coming back to me is the sense of homelessness. So
I wonder if this is a moment where, we'll collect maybe a couple of questions. I also want to make sure that we give Ira a chance to offer some closing remarks, and we end by 8:30. So maybe take 2 or 3 questions, if that's all right, for both of you. Yeah, in the back.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Ali, and I'm doing a course at Columbia Journalism School. In India, I was a journalist with The Hindu, and I was based in Western UP. I reported a lot on communal violence as well as the emergence of Bhima Army. So I want to pick from what Sudipto said, who else could be the best friend of Rohit than a beef-eating Muslim? And also, that's relevant because I'm working on a book on lynchings of Muslims in India. So the idea that in the last 4 years that I was there in Western UP, I've noticed a substantial solidarity, which I didn't notice earlier, as a Muslim from Hindu heartland and a cowboy state like UP. This increasing solidarity between Dalits and and Muslims. I mean, during my reportage and doing stories on Bhima in Saharanpur villages, like the moment I'll tell these Ambedkarite youths who were cadres of Bhima that I'm a Muslim, my name is Muhammad Ali, they'll be so relieved because generally the mainstream media guys were like religious and they don't trust them. So my question is to Sudipto, of course, that how do you see that relationship between Rohit and his friend? Do you find it how do you see that relationship in other parts of the country? Do you find a larger solidarity emerging, and what are the nuances of it? Because sometimes I feel that these political leaders, and especially for Muslims, who just think that, okay, Dalits are one big category and Muslims are one big category, they come together and that's it. So what are the, like, if you could explain it in terms of your nuanced view about this issue?
And can I offer you a view that's not very nuanced, which is that this relationship between Dalits and Muslims is very complicated, of course, and that's why the question. But the way I've romanticized it, when it comes to Rohit and Riaz, is something that in hindsight, this proposal was written, you must also keep in mind, just a few months into my research. It was written at least close to 2 years ago now. And so things have changed, and how I see this equation has also changed. And I realized that for Dalits to do business with Muslims, first they have to have the political power that Muslims have, which Dalits don't have. There is, yes, Muslims always resist the idea of a homogeneous Muslim vote, but it is a fact that you can walk into, just like how you can walk into a Dalit area and say I'm Muhammad Ali and find acceptance. I can walk into any Muslim area with the idea that anyway you guys are anti-BJP and find acceptance to that idea. That you're going to vote Congress, right? Yeah, Congress. So how about these leaders? Then the story becomes how these leaders use this, but we're still voting for him or whatever. But nevertheless, there is a certain sense you get very easily in a Muslim neighborhood. But the point, more importantly, that you've raised is the equation between Dalits and Muslims, and I think it's fraught. And I talked about this earlier in the day today, where I said that, Muslims, and now I discovered, see, the thing is, there are lots of things I forgot as I came out of my neighborhood, and I discovered, people of books, right? And there are these theories floating around, and these last 2 years that I've been on a sabbatical, I've pretty much been staying at home, writing, playing football with my old friends, right? And then I discovered that, no, all these theories aside, there is a deep mistrust between Dalits and Muslims, there is a deep hatred. And for me, the Muslim question has come, obviously, because I'm from inside looking out. And we talked about this also, Muhammad. I'm saying that I'm not going to be nuanced about this, I'm trying to be. But how do I say this besides, the Muslims have been a ruling community in India. They have tasted power. They know what it feels like. What is remarkable and what is tragic, really. It's almost genocide. Of course, it's genocidal, and it sounds like the Holocaust almost. If you take the time period away, and if you just look at what's happened to the Muslims, that they've been reduced from ruling class to below us, supposedly. According to the Sachar Committee report, Muslims are worse off than Dalits are, and that's a reality we must take in all humility before making points such as this. But then, the memory of having held power remains in that community. Their reference point is Tipu Sultan. Right? My reference point is some other slave like me. And okay, I'm a half slave, so so half of me is like some other slave. I don't know, but my point is that the Muslim in India, should I say make such a big statement? No. My sense is that Muslims hate the fact that they've been ghettoized. Obviously, any former ruling class community would feel horrible about being ghettoized, but they also hate the people who were in the ghetto when they arrived. That's us. They hate the fact that they've been reduced to the level of the Dalit in India. And that is my not so nuanced answer to that. I'm just saying it the way I see it.
I love that, because mostly the conversation on Muslim Dalits are extremely romanticized.
Yes, yes. Just beef is not like, come on, man. And it's like, we eat the same food. Everybody eats rice, so.
Yeah. And then I think maybe we'll take one more.
I'll be very brief. I come from JNU. The recent struggle was not the first struggle of the SCST. We fought the battle in 1982 and 83. And we defeated the present Politburo members, SFI, Sitaram Achuri, and the other one. So, seems like I really appreciate your exposition, but things that happened way back have not changed. It seems like the same thing. So my question would be more towards, I mean, when we fought, at least in our generation, we will destroy the caste system.
Pardon me?
We will destroy the caste system. That's why we made sacrifices. A few Dalits got benefits, but the rest of them stayed the same. But there is a fight going on. I'm wondering, so what way we can trust the Dutchies, then we can trust the other one. So what is the solution? What way this fight should go? And what is it we can do from the people outside the India? Like when they attacked apartheid, all the companies like Coca-Cola and all these companies that were helping the apartheid were banned by progressive students in the beginning, like Robia and so on and so forth. So could we have that kind of movement? So eventually we'll see the end of it. Otherwise, it's going in circles and.
Can I maybe see if there's one or two more comments, and then we should probably bring it to a close. So Varsha, yeah, and then.
So my question is, with the intercaste marriage, this lopsidedness, Dalit men marrying upper caste men, specifically
I was hoping
the most preferred choice of Dalit men.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah.
And it's also resulting in Dalit women. I mean, the surplus woman now is Dalit woman. In that sense. So, look at RPI leaders, Dalit interventions.
Yeah,
So what is
what is this is something that it's a very serious, and I think this is.
So take these two questions.
So the cyclical aspect, I think that's life. I mean, we go around in cycles. What happened will happen again, and it's not just just a dismissive statement. I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss what you're saying, but essentially, if you ask me the specific question as to where does the movement go from here, I think it's become stronger than it was in the last cycle. We talk about waves, and waves can be also imagined as cycles. So anyway, but the point is that for true emancipation, I suppose the elephant has to discover its own might. That we are 30% of the population actually. If you take away the religious artificial divisions that Dalits have been put into, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, when they realize that actually we are, the Pasmanda movement, the Dalit Christian movement and all that, that's really the future of our politics. And once there is, there's an agreement over a shared history among Dalits, there's this, we talk about universal Ambedkar, and that's why it's important, I suppose, because, sometimes it's not just enough for Ambedkar to be within us and among us, for him to travel outside, come back, and then for us to look at him as Dalit Christians look at Jesus, Cornel West talks about the prophetic tradition, to stop looking at him, and some people have a problem with Dalits looking at him as a prophet, breaking coconuts in front of a statue, and I'm like, why not? Look at what happened to Jesus of Nazareth, and so I'm happy with that, So that, I suppose, to a certain extent should answer what you're saying, but this very difficult, one of the reasons my book has been delayed, and I'm very honest about this, and is because I've been struggling with the sexual politics of the campus, and this proposal is like what I hid behind. If you see my writing, I mean, this is one question that I'm struggling with, and which is why I'm not able to complete the book. Because you're talking about a campus where there are about 3,500 people, 4,000 people below the age of 35, raging hormones. Everybody is, in the game. And these questions are recurring things which come up in a, so you're thinking, oh, well, everyone's talking Marx and Derrida and Foucault and Ambedkar. No, but they're also looking to hook up, and political parties and those kind of spaces, as you I'm sure would have noticed in TIS where you're from, they become like, places to meet. And all of that is happening. And I'll just talk about 2-3 things that I'm struggling with, if you'll allow me. And these are just, I don't have a final sense of this. But, Dalit men often complain that, accuse upper caste women of racism. Right? And this question also, by the way, many people might relate to it out here in the US. A lot of African American women say the same thing about their men. The best among them are taken by white women. The best among us are unfortunately, fortunately, or whatever. I mean, it's Ambedkar's vision, right? But the point is, so when these men turn around and accuse upper caste women of racism, the question, it looks very radical, and you don't want to sleep with me because I'm black or I'm Dalit, right? And therefore almost like, it's a form of coercion almost, right? And I find that very disturbing as a trend among black men and Dalit men. I'm sorry to say this, and I have to say this in public because it is problematic. And it's also, but what makes it really problematic is when Dalit women turn around and ask that same guy, saying that she's racist because she doesn't like you, because you're black and Dalit or whatever. Okay, what is it that makes you not like me? Yeah, but I mean, that is a question to which no great Dalit radical man has an answer to. Because he's trying to be radical in front of that upper caste woman, trying to tell her that, there's a certain kind of Olympic wrestling happening there, right? So there is that thing. But then, when I went with that question into the campus, one of the things I found is that the Dalit women on campus were all second generation women. Okay, because obviously if a family has the money to send kids to university, they'll first send a boy. Okay, and that boy, when he grows up, becomes an IAS officer, will send his daughter also to university. I mean, so most often the Dalit women on campus were all second generation girls, and they wouldn't look at Dalit boys. Right? They want upper caste men. Right? So that is also happening. So therefore the answer that I kind of am really close to fixing on is that there is a certain amount of self-loathing within the community. I loathe the way I look in the mirror. Not actually how I look in the mirror, but how I appear to other people. How they invisibilize me. And I suppose, the choice of a partner becomes a choice of a crutch for me. To visualize, to suddenly become visible to a group of 50 people, because they might not be looking at me, but at least they're looking at who I am with. And it comes from a deep place of insecurity, a deep place of self-loathing, quite often. If you look at it as a social trend, as a source of validation. And that's not where love should come from, it's unfortunate. That's what caste does to love, I suppose.
I'm going to let Gavitra have the last word on this and then invite Ira to come up.
Well, it's more of a question than a last word. I'm deeply, deeply curious, Sudipto or anyone else who wants to address it. Is there legibility for coolies among Ambedkarites or in the Dalit conversation? Is there a sense of coolitude or who the descendants of Ambedkar are? Do people know about it? Are they interested in it in terms of?
The scholars are, of course, they are global and international and cosmopolitan. They're obviously interested in these narratives that overlap with ours. But if you ask me back in my neighborhood, everybody's a coolie. It's a body worker. Somebody's going down a manhole, somebody's going up a tree. But they're all they're all body workers.
But different meaning of the word.
Pardon?
My entire village is coolie.
That's Shiva, one of our Ambedkar friends.
So if you go to any village, there's, like as I said, there's a geographical segregations on that. If you go to any of the areas, most of the coolies, I say maybe from southern part, most of the coolies are from the Dalit communities, and I say there are other groups, economically the backward groups also part of it, but
Very honestly, I haven't seen single coolie in the entire Tamil Nadu coming from a Brahmin background.
Forgive me, I actually meant coolie in the very specific context of indentured labor or descendant of.
And the kinds of affinities, in some sense, of this broader world.
More specific.
I think we know that, right? I think there is a solidarity. Kanchiram, actually, Raju Kamble had initiated the first conversation with the indentured who went to Malaysia as workers in the colonial regime. And the first conference that took place in 1998, and it was organized primarily by the Dalits who had migrated as indentured slaves, and they kind of did. Same happened with the Caribbean context, and Indian Oceanic waves, but the idea of caste became submerged because nobody wanted to identify. We want to now go
Well,
back.
coolie became its own caste.
That's right. But there is a conversation.
You're right. Yeah.
Not to end that conversation, but
I
perhaps
forwarded that question to our foreign office. We call people. No, really. I mean, can I make this quick point, if you allow
Sure.
me? I suppose it kind of once again comes back to what I opened with, the power of the Ambedkarite movement, right? I mean, I just want to show, so Suraj Engde, Tenmozhi Soundararajan, Vinaya Kobragade, Milind Sir, there he is. The ANA, for example, right? The Ambedkarites Association of North America, the Ambedkar King Circle, which is in the West Coast. All of these people have made this conversation possible, and the thing is, there's a lot of talk about divisions within Dalit political formation. I mean, the Dalit universe itself, and how there are different ideological positions. But what I'm now in awe of is the diversity of opinion that exists within the anti-caste movement, at the center of which are Dalits such as Suraj, Tenmozhi, groups such as ANA and Ambedkar. So Ambedkar King Circle is supposedly a Dalit Marxist formation, and then there are other formations which are aligned other ways. And it suddenly starts seeming like a universe unto itself, which now is ready to take on the world. So by forwarding that question, I really didn't know the answer to that. I didn't know the context in which you were asking that, but then, I knew that you have a scholar such as Suraj, there are many of us sitting around here. So yeah, in that sense, I want to say that it's a very important moment in our history.
Not to close the conversation, but to maybe bring this evening to a close, I'd like to invite Ira to come up and offer some closing remarks, also by thinking through India, indenture, and then also race in the United States, and kind of bringing it all back home in some ways, I guess. Thank you, Ira.
Thank you. Thank you for these bracing, beautiful talks, and deeply instructive. I thank you for inviting me to say a word, even though my knowledge of India is limited to episodic reading and only 3 visits, though those visits were deeply instructive because they were to work on a book that I co-edited with Partha Chatterjee, which was called Anxieties of Democracy, Tocquevillian reflections on India and the United States. And what my own very limited, alas, engagement with India has taught me, and taught me in ways that I'm deeply indebted to Anu, to Partha, to other colleagues, Sudipta Kaviraj, to the late Al Stepan, is to find the vantage through the experience of complex Indian society and democracy, to find the vantage from which to think about the United States, and to make studies of this complex and difficult country a bit less insular, a bit less smug, a bit less provincial. So I thank you all for that. The remarks we heard this evening are about a profound difficulty and a profound irony. The difficulty is that humankind appears to be, in the language of political theorist Istvan Hunt, in a permanent crisis of a divided humankind. And there's a profound irony at work. The discovery of social, cultural, religious pluralism by ancient empires, by modern global conquests, by anti-colonial movements, helped generate a sense of a common humanity. The idea that despite many differences, others are more like us, and that we are more like each other, and we owe each other a threshold of regard and respect. And yet, divisions of us and them, divisions of faith, divisions of geography, divisions of color, hierarchies marked by humbling and humiliating and danger and imprisoning exclusions, if anything, have become more profound, precisely as ideas about human fellowship have advanced. And that's our condition. Propinquity and distance, regard and loathing, as Ambedkar well knew, often coincide. And this is a paradox with which he wrestled. I take away a challenge from the conversation this evening, and indeed from Ambedkar's legacy, how to proceed as scholars and as citizens, as thinkers and as doers, to develop understanding and institutional imagination that can not create a single romantic human commonality and human fellowship. The leap from where we are to that is simply too great. But how to move through our particularities to common regard and neighborliness. And that's a deep, deep challenge to all of us. So I want to close in two ways. First, by simply, if you allow me to climb not so much a ladder of abstraction, but an analytical ladder, to propose that we need to pay attention to 4 levels of analysis. I want to say what they are. Then close by speaking of 3 different kinds of sensibilities we might bring, and I'm going to do that in 5 minutes. I'm tempted to launch into a lecture. Whenever you put me at a lectern, that's, you could be here for a long time. I'd inflict myself, but I won't. But what are the 4 layers or dimensions that I think when we study hierarchies of race and racism, or hierarchies of caste, or hierarchies of gender that we need to consider? Well, the first is simply the structure of the situation. How do we think about the structure of situations? And what we heard tonight, or at least what I heard, were 4 or 5 different levels at which the structure of the situation is arranged. First, there are questions of space, physical and social space. Who moves how through where? Whether it's across the ocean, whether it's to a university campus, whether it's our own neighborhoods and communities. The second question of any of these situations is one of physical security. Which spaces can we move through feeling secure? Because absent security, we can't talk of justice, we can't talk of decency, we can't talk of respect. Third aspect of the situation, which of course the questions about indentured labor raise, the material conditions of life. How do we gain the means to eat, to clothe, to house, and perhaps better than just those basics? A fourth and still different level of situation we heard about tonight has to do with culture and education. Which features of culture are respected by whom? Whose language gets to be heard? When and under which conditions does schooling erase or value a human difference? And finally, the last aspect of the situation, which we didn't talk much about, but in India is especially vibrant, is the question of the relationship between civic inclusion and political rights. And they're not exactly the same thing. One can vote and participate, and indeed In India, unlike the US, correct me if I'm wrong empirically, the less well-off you are, the more humiliated you are in the structure of the society, the more likely you are to vote. Precisely the reverse of the United States, if you look at voting data. Who votes and in what numbers? It's a counter current, but that doesn't always add up to full civic inclusion. And the question of the relationship of the civic and the political is sort of deeply puzzling. That's the structure of the situation. But then there are three other levels we heard about, and I'm just really reflecting on what I heard. There's a second level, which is the level of experience. Situations are not experienced the same way even by the same person at a different moment, let alone by different people. And how do we think about the linkages between structures of situations and the manner in which people experience those situations? And experience is not the same as dispositions of what sense we make of our experiences. That requires tools. It requires ideas and ideologies. It requires organization. It requires many things. But we now have three loosely coupled elements: structure, experience, dispositions. And only together do they produce human behavior, human action, human sensibilities, the kinds of things we talked about today, the particulars of doing as opposed to experiencing, understanding, feeling, and living in particular situations. And finally, how do we approach these questions? It seems to me I also heard three sensibilities at work. There is a quest for justice, a quest for something better. Families, the stories we heard tonight were in part about persons who aspire to create for themselves and for others what the philosopher John Rawls called realistic utopias. Something just beyond the immediate reach, not so far away that it's not realistic, but something that promises vast improvement. And that's for individuals, it's for families, it's for communities, it's for countries, it's for societies as a whole. That's one sensibility. But there's a second sensibility which seems very different, which is pure pragmatism. What judgments do we make about particular policies, particular ways of moving from here to there in our lives, particular decisions we take, which must be practical and pragmatic? And how do they connect to this larger aspiration? And finally, there is what yet another political theorist, Judith Shklar, called in her studies of liberal tradition, a liberalism of fear. That is a sense that things don't always get better. Sometimes they get worse. And our job is often not that of creating the more just, it's that of preventing the most cruel. And how do we do that? How do we guard against depredation? So it seems to me we have both analytical and social tasks to conquer if we're to build on the kind of really quite beautiful and stirring remarks which were at once about justice, about realism, and about preventing cruelty. I just want to close. I got a note the other day from my friend in India, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who sent me an article he wrote about Ambedkar on the occasion of Ambedkar's 125th birthday, which I believe was 2 years ago, if I have the dates right. And he wrote the following: with many great leaders, we assess how they measure up to standards and ideals of a civilization. In Ambedkar's case, the reverse is true. He is the yardstick to which a whole civilization must measure up. We don't judge him by our ideals. He should be the ideal by which we judge ourselves. In engaging with Ambedkar, the question is not of assessing him, it is of assessing ourselves and trying to understand why we continue to avoid confronting his bracing call to justice, his advocacy of reason, the depth of his institutional imagination. He is the mirror in which we dare not look at ourselves. His presence is a constant reminder of our bad conscience and bad faith. Thank you.
So, Kevin, thank you all for coming. And thank you, Gayatri, very, very much indeed. Ira, this is a beautiful ending as well. Good on you, Columbia, and